AV in your ears. That's Ambush Van giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street. You already know. Let's get it. When you whip in the Fascination Street, what do you...
Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Spencer Garrett. You know Spencer Garrett because he has been in every television show ever and in also all the movies. In this episode, we talk about some of those movies and some of those TV shows. He tells wonderful behind-the-scenes stories about a few of the projects that are near and dear to me, for sure, and him as well. We talk about how he got into the business and who he studied with and who his parents are. We talked about some of the actors and some of the directors he's worked with and what those mean to him and meant to him even in the moment. We take a tiny little detour about what he did after college in D.C. We touch on his role as producer and star on a podcast called America 2.0, which is a political podcast. It is a scripted fiction podcast in 6 parts, which I highly recommend you check it out. There might be a season 2 coming. Keep your ears peeled for that. And then he tells me a sweet little story about meeting the creator of one of the most American toys ever when he was a kid and how fun that was. But mostly, we just have a good time talking about the fun things in Hollywood and beyond. Spencer is full of great stories. He has been everywhere, knows everybody, and does everything. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Yes, there's a lot of name dropping, but it is all organic and it serves a purpose. He's not just willy-nilly, I know this person and I know that person. There's actual stories. They are fantastic. And this is my conversation with the wonderful Spencer Garrett.
Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast. Spencer Garrett, how you doing today, man?
I'm fantastic, brother. Nice to meet you. Good to be here. You got my early morning bed head, bed face. I'm in the middle of a move, and I've got boxes everywhere, but I got a giant pot of coffee going, and I'm ready to roll.
Hey, a giant pot of coffee is all that matters.
That's it.
Where'd you move from and to? Same city?
Same city. Yeah.
Cool.
From one part of the city to another.
Are you a LA guy?
I'm in LA, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll give you my address afterwards so you can send me the big check.
Oh, okay, cool. It's going to be a giant foam check.
Nice.
Like Ed McMahon used to show up with.
I love it. I love it.
Spencer, what I like to do is I like to get to know the guests from the beginning. It helps us understand, how you got from where you were to where you are. So where were you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
Born and raised here in Los Angeles, Brentwood, Santa Monica area. Mom is an actor. Father was a talent manager, talent agent. And I kind of grew up between LA and New York City for the first sort of 15 years of my life. My folks split up after a year, a whirlwind courtship that didn't take hold, but they stayed friends for the rest of their lives. And
hey, they were together long enough to make you, and that's all that matters, right?
I think possibly I was made on the night they met. The story goes, they met at a party. He was playing the piano. She sat down next to him. And, years later, they said, the marriage didn't work, but why did you marry him? And she said, he played in my key. So he played songs, she sang, they fell in love. I think romance was in the air. And 9 months later, here I am.
It sounds like she had a brand new pair of roller skates and he had a key.
That's quite possible. They were a fascinating couple, an interesting couple. In fact, tomorrow is actually my mom's 91st birthday, and I'm taking her to dinner at her favorite restaurant, the classic Musso and Frank's here in Hollywood.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're having a big party for her 91st tonight. But I grew up between here and New York. She'd go to New York and do a play on Broadway. So we lived in New York for a couple of years, back and forth and back and forth. LA was home base. And then ultimately, after high school and college, I kind of stayed on the East Coast. I lived in D.C. for a couple of years, which is where I started acting, and then moved to New York. I was in New York from the early 80s until the mid 90s, I guess. Had a place there up until a couple of years ago. But LA is my home and New York is my heart.
Love it.
Yeah.
We're going to bounce all over the place, but am I correct? Your mom was a 2-time SAG president?
You are correct, sir. First female president of a labor union in the world ever. 2-time president of SAG from 72 to 77, I think.
Was she before or after Ed Asner?
She was before Ed Asner.
Ed Asner, he was also a 2-time president of SAG.
He was. I think Ed might have come either directly after her. There was a William Shallard in there. There was a John Gavin in there. I think it was Mom and then Ed, or Bill Shallard, and then Ed, Patty Duke. But yeah, she preceded Ed. And they were very, very dear friends.
Well, Ed is a 2-time guest at my show. That dude was rad as hell.
Oh, no kidding? Wow.
Oh, that guy was so cool.
I know we lost him a couple of years ago. He was 90. He had a good long run.
He did. The second time I interviewed him was during his 90th year. The day that his second episode came out, he was the oldest person that I had as a guest. And then that same day I interviewed the youngest person that I had as a guest, which is a young actress. She was 9 at the time. And her name is Sammy Haney. She was in Raising Dion on Netflix. She was so dope.
You should get my mom on your show.
I would love to have your mom on my show.
Yeah. I happen to know her. I can make. Yeah, I do. I can make that call.
You sound like Clint Howard. I was interviewing Clint Howard at his house, and he was like, "You know who you should interview is my dad."
Oh yeah.
And I did. And Rance was amazing.
Oh my God, what a legend! What a great guy! Actually, was just with last week. Randomly, I was in Aspen, Colorado, at an event there, and Ron Howard and his wife, Cheryl, I think they just celebrated 45 years.
It's something like that. It's a long time.
Ron and Cheryl and his daughter, Bryce, and her husband, Seth. And Ron is one of the great dudes. I mean, he's just one of the nicest. I mean, he literally is the nicest man in show business.
I have met him and all of his kids. I don't think I've met Cheryl. And they were all just the nicest, sweetest people. And from the top down.
Great people.
Rance was amazing, and so it stands to reason that everybody else is too. Tell me about the Golden Rod.
The Golden Rod Showboat was a floating theater on the Mississippi River, docked on the Mississippi River in St. Louis, that my mom and my aunt grew up on with my grandparents, who were also actors, Stephen Ellsworth and Clara Kennedy. And they raised my mom and my aunt, Nancy Devlin, on the Golden Rod. They lived in St. Louis, but there was a working theater on the boat, and people in St. Louis would come onto the boat and they would put on plays and musicals. And that's where my mom and my aunt started. My mom started, I think her stage debut was like 6 months old or something. And they pretty much grew up in and around St. Louis doing theater there and on the Golden Rod, but that was kind of their home base. And the Golden Rod used to go up and down the Mississippi and stop in little towns like Joplin and Hannibal and St. Joe, and people from the town would get on the boat and they would put on a show and they'd go on to the town the next day. It was a national landmark, and I think it got torn down. It fell into disrepair many, many years ago, and now it's sitting in dry dock in a parking lot somewhere in St. Louis. But you can find it online. It was a beautiful thing. I never got to see it. I never saw it in person, but I have all sorts of memorabilia from it, and of course my mom does. And it was a beautiful, beautiful boat. I wish I'd had a chance to be on it, but the stories that I heard of my grandparents and my mom and my Aunt Nancy growing up on the boat and doing theater there and making theater as kids, that sort of informed what I wanted to do as a kid. I mean, it just sounded so romantic and thrilling.
Okay, let's get to that. So you say it inspired you kind of as a kid, but if I understand correctly, you didn't even really dip your toes into acting until after college. Is that right?
It's not entirely accurate. I did theater in high school, all through elementary school and high school, which is where I really got the bug in high school in Maine.
Maine?
Yeah.
Why? What? Oh, wait, hold on. We went from LA to New York. Now you're in Maine?
I went to high school in Maine. I went to a crunchy performing arts based high school in Bath, Maine called Hyde School from 78 to 81. I mean, I did work as an actor as a kid. I mean, I didn't dive into it full bore in my teens, in my youth. Not really until after college, but my mom's best friend was a writer named Noreen Stone, and she wrote a movie of the week called Are You a Missing Heir? H-E-I-R. And there was a part of a little German boy in it. And I used to run around the house doing little accents. And whenever I would see someone on TV doing an accent, I would try to mimic the accent. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I read the script and I didn't tell my mom. And I took a bus. Somehow I found out how to get an audition. I think a friend of a friend who was an agent got me in the room, and I didn't tell my mom or Noreen, the writer. And I took a bus to the audition, and I went and I walked in, And Noreen was there because she was the writer and one of the producers on the thing. And I went and I did this little German accent and I got the role.
How old were you?
I think I was 10 or 11.
You took a city bus at 10 or 11? That's awesome.
I took a city bus, the RTD on Sunset Boulevard down to Culver Studios and got cast in this little movie of the week. But I had done, my mom was in a film called Limbo in 1973 with Kate Jackson, directed by Mark Robeson, who famously directed Earthquake and a whole myriad of movies. But I was Taft-Hartley'd into SAG at 8.
Wow.
So technically, I was eligible to join SAG at 8 if I wanted to. So I had a small role in that. My mom was one of the first women directors in the American Film Institute Women Directors Workshop with Maya Angelou and Margot Kidder and Diane Ladd. And she directed a movie with Diane Ladd, and I had a little speaking part in that. So I did little bits and bobs of acting here and there as a kid. I mean, and enough to whet my interest, enough to spark my curiosity about it. But I wasn't child actor. I did little things here and there, but I didn't really jump into it full bore until I got out of college. I think in 85 or 86, I auditioned for a pilot that I got cast in. And I was flown out from New York. They put all of us young actors up at the Chateau Marmont. I think they paid me $35,000 for 3 weeks' work. It was more money than I made in 2 years of waiting tables in New York. And I thought, well, this is pretty good. If I'm going to be a struggling actor, I might as well be living in LA and drinking a Corona on the beach than slogging through a New York winter. And so I came out here for good after college. I graduated college in 87. I moved out here in 89.
They paid you $35,000 in 1985 or 6?
Yes, sir, they did.
Whoa, that is insane. That is so much money.
It was a lot of money. It was a lot. I mean, I'll never forget it because I saved every penny of it and I paid off my student loans with it.
Oh, how cute. You could pay off a student loan back then for that kind of money?
Yeah. I think back then I owed $42,000. I paid off the rest of it, my loan, with the money that I made from that pilot. It was called When We Were Young, and the cast was, get this, because it's a phenomenal cast. Steven Weber, who went on to do Wings and a million things, who's one of my dearest friends to this day. Grant Show from Melrose Place, etc. Jace Alexander, Jane Krakowski, Cynthia Gibb, Lindsay Frost, Eric LaSalle from ER, Dylan Walsh, who back then was Charlie Walsh, who went on to do, Nip Tuck and lots of things. A tremendous cast of all young actors, all of whom went on to work. And it was sort of a prequel to the show Dynasty. It was like the characters from Dynasty in high school. And it took place on the graduation eve of high school in 1959. And we were all in our mid to late 20s playing high school students. It was pretty ridiculous. But the check cleared, so I had no qualms with it.
It sounds like Reed Diamond. Do you know him?
I know Reed very well. Yeah, I love Reed.
It sounds like Reed in that he did like a commercial that paid for like Juilliard. I'm just like,
that's right.
Money was different back then, folks.
Yeah.
Both the pay and what things cost.
100%.
Again, we're going to jump all over the place. So after you got out of college, now I understand that I think you went to Duke and Fordham.
I did. Yeah.
When you got out of college, you worked in D.C. for 4 years with NPR?
I did. I worked for NPR. So I left Duke after my junior year, and I got an internship with NPR. And I was there for about 2.5 years. I was kind of a paid intern. I worked on Capitol Hill. I wrote stories from AP copy that was coming in on the wire. I mean, it was a very analog time back then. It was a much, much different time. But I had a blast. I mean, I was 20, 21, 22, running around DC, exploring, dipping my toes into theater there and auditioning for things at Arena Stage and Woolly Mammoth and all of the theater companies there and getting little parts here and there. And then NPR, it was being run at the time by Frank Mankiewicz, famously Bobby Kennedy's campaign manager back in the 60s. And he was running NPR and kind of ran it into the ground, unfortunately. And so they let 200 people go suddenly. So I was without a job. But it was really just an internship. And I got another job at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, worked there for another year and bopped around DC. And finally, I thought, I'm not going to wear a suit and carry a briefcase and work on Capitol Hill and be one of those guys. It just wasn't in my blood. And I was thinking about doing theater, thinking about getting out and doing something in the arts. And so I left DC, moved to New York, enrolled at Fordham and Lincoln Center, and did my last year of college there and started auditioning, started training, started studying, Started studying with Sanford Meisner from the Neighborhood Playhouse. I ended up working with him for about 12 years.
The actual Meisner.
The actual Meisner.
Now, your mom trained with him too, right?
That's right. She studied with him. She was at the Neighborhood Playhouse in 1955. She was there for the whole program. I believe she was there with Joanne Woodward and Steve McQueen and Duvall. I mean, the class that she was in was ridiculous. So when I decided that I was going to be an actor, I told my mom, I told my dad, I said, I think I want to do this. And my mom said, well, if you do, you have to study with the best. And so I went and sat and interviewed with Sandy Meisner. And I'll never forget it because he told me something that I tell my acting students. I teach out here. I've been teaching out here for many years. And he said, listen, don't do this unless you absolutely need to do it. If your brain and your body and your heart and your soul and your bones needs this, that's the only way this is going to work. It's a roller coaster ride. It's a shitty business. It'll eat you up. And I was 21 and I was eager and I wanted to jump in. And I'd also watched my mom's career go up and down and my other actors in my family. I mean, it's a brutal business. So I signed up with Sandy and I studied with him at his home on his island in Bequia in the West Indies. And that was my introduction to Sandy. And then I ended up studying with him for about 9 years after that. So he was extraordinary. He was an extraordinary teacher.
What is the biggest, if you had to narrow, I mean, it's impossible, but if you had to narrow what you learned from him over that nearly a decade that you trained with him, what do you think is the biggest thing you learned from Meisner?
Very simple, and I quote it all the time, and it's the most distilled, granular explanation of his teaching that I can possibly articulate, which is acting is the ability to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. That's it. Living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, being real, being present, being alive in the moment, listening to your partner, being fully in your body, being present with your partner in the moment, and reacting truthfully, living truthfully. That's basically it. But that's probably his most famous quote. Acting is the ability to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And then he also used a quote. It was either Goethe or Nietzsche who said basically, I wish the stage were as narrow as a tightrope so that no dare incompetent would ever step upon it. So I worked with a few of those folks that I wish hadn't dared step on the tightrope because it is a tightrope. It's a very narrow tightrope. But Sandy was a tough taskmaster. He was tough. He was tough on me. He was very, very tough on me when I was a young kid because I had no idea what I was doing. I had done plays in college. I stood out in certain things that I did at Duke and before then, but I had no technique. I had no training. I had no idea what I was doing, really. And then Sandy basically just took me as a giant lump of clay and said, okay, I'm gonna shape you into an actor. But he was really, really hard on me. And I never really understood why he was so hard on me until years later. He slammed his cane down one night in the middle of class, and I'd done something wrong in class, and I went to him afterwards, and I said, why are you so hard on me? I've been your student forever. And he said, because I believe in you, because you're good, and I think you have potential. I don't want you to lie. I don't want you to fake it. And he caught me faking it. He caught me, quote unquote, acting one day. So I'm always afraid that the acting police are going to come from around the corner with their sirens and throw me in acting jail if I make a false note. Or the ghost of Sandy will come and haunt me in my dreams, which he does.
He does.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by Murray River Salt USA, Australia's only naturally pink salt. What makes Murray River Salt so good? Murray River Salt is sourced from the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia and is prized for its unique flavor, its delicate texture, its high mineral content, and it's kosher certified. Awarded for superior taste by the International Taste Institute, it's highly sought after by chefs and food enthusiasts alike. Naturally different with 2/3 less sodium per teaspoon, no dextrose, no chemicals, no pesticides, and Murray River's high mineral content not only enhances the flavor but also contributes to its health benefits, and it contains a range of trace minerals like magnesium, calcium, and potassium. This pristine saline water source has been trapped underground for thousands of years and has not been exposed to the elements until it is pumped up for salt production, where the brine is solar evaporated and crystallizes over the summer months. Murray River salt comes in a variety of options, from pouches to canisters, boxes, and even gift sets for that chef or foodie in your life. Finally, Australia's only naturally pink salt is available here in the United States. For 10% off your order, go to murrayriversaltusa.com and use the code FSP10 at checkout. Again, that's 10% off your whole order at murrayriversaltusa.com with the promo code FSP10. And remember, it's perfect for any dish, so sprinkle it on your food as a finishing salt for a hydrating boost of electrolytes, throw it in some water, and it's great for margaritas too. Everything tastes better with Murray River salt.
Let's get back into it.
Okay, back to Mankiewicz for a hot second.
Yeah.
You worked for him when he was in charge of NPR, and then, fast forward a million years, you were in the movie Bobby.
Yeah.
Which I would imagine there was a character that was him.
You know what? I don't think there was a Frank Mankiewicz. I mean, there wasn't anybody named Frank Mankiewicz in the movie. They were all fictitious characters in Emilio's film. But if there was a campaign manager character in that film, it would have been me. They just didn't call me Frank Mankiewicz. But that's another story in itself about how I ended up doing that movie.
Let's hear it, because Emilio doesn't do any interviews. So
that was a great experience. And again, and Emilio is somebody who's been a great champion of mine and a pal.
You've been in 3 of his movies, right?
3 of his movies. I just adore him to the moon. He was getting his directing legs by doing episodic television. He was directing CSI and Cold Case and things like that to kind of get his chops up. He directed some features already. He directed 3 or 4 features, I think, before Bobby. Wisdom.
I loved Wisdom. That was such a good movie. Oh, that was a good movie.
I did too. My godfather was in that. My godfather, Liam Sullivan, was in that movie. Homefront, which is based on a wonderful play by James Duff that was done by Carol O'Connor on Broadway and I think Michael O'Keefe. James Duff, who went on to become the showrunner of The Closer and other things. But I met Emilio. He directed me on a show called Close to Home, a CBS kind of procedural drama. I auditioned for him and I met him in the room that day. We didn't know each other. And we just kind of took a liking to each other. And when we worked together over the 10 or 12 days or so of that gig, there was a kinship there. And we became pals on that thing. And he said, listen, pulled me aside. And he said, I'm trying to put together this movie about the last day in the life of Bobby Kennedy. And I think I have Anthony Hopkins attached. And I'm trying to get some other people on board. He said, I think there's a role in there that you'd be great for. And I'd love you to do it. I said, great. We parted ways. The job ended. And I thought, if I had $1 for every time somebody said, hey, I'm going to put you in my movie. And literally 6 months later, I was in Istanbul, Turkey, I'm going to put this in my book. One of these days I need to write a book. I was in Istanbul about 6 months later. Emilio and I had stayed in touch. This is long before texting. And I was in Istanbul doing a movie with Gary Busey and Billy Zane.
Jesus.
That's a story I'm not even going to go into because that's a whole podcast. And I got a message at the front desk at the hotel from Emilio while I was in Istanbul. He said, hey, the movie's all come together. I've got Sharon Stone and Demi Moore and Lindsay Lohan and Helen Hunt and Martin Sheen and Shia LaBeouf and on and on and on. And he said, remember when I pulled you aside and said, I want you to be in it? He said, well, I want you to be in it. And the role works in 2 days. And I was literally I was wrapping the movie in Istanbul on a Monday, flew to London, had a fitting with a costume designer in London the next day, flew from London to LA. And long story short, within 72 hours, I had gone from Istanbul to London to LA, and I was on the set filming in 1960s period costume at the Ambassador Hotel that was being torn down as we were filming the movie.
Wow.
We actually filmed in the ballroom at the Ambassador. The bullet holes from Sirhan Sirhan were in the kitchen, in the pantry where Bobby was shot. It was trippy and surreal. I was jet lagged off my face. I was only supposed to be in one scene. where I'm standing in front of a bus and I'm talking to the kids outside the bus. I'm trying to get them to vote. And I'm holding up this thing that's an IBM voting card, and I'm talking about the hanging Chads on the voting card. Remember the Chads from?
I sure do.
From the Florida recount. So that was a nice little callback to that. So I was in that one scene. Emilio said, "What are you doing after this?" And I said, "I got nothing lined up." And he said, "Great, I'm going to find a way to keep you in the movie and throughout the movie." So I ended up being on the picture. He kind of peppered me in throughout the rest of the film. He made me feel like I was every bit as much of one of the stars, quote unquote, that were in that film. And it was a lovely ride. Joshua Jackson and Brian Garrity and, oh my gosh, Elijah Wood. Everybody was in that movie.
Everybody was in that
Everybody was in that movie. Looking back on it, it's a terrific film. It's a really beautifully crafted film.
It's fantastic.
That was a great gift to me from one of the genuinely kindest people I've ever known, Emilio. And I've worked with him 2 other times since on The Public and The Way. He flew me to Spain to do one scene with his dad, with Martin Sheen on a golf course in Madrid. So he obviously likes what I do, and I love what he does.
Well, he is a fantastic director. I think I've seen everything he's directed.
Mm-hmm.
Movies. I haven't seen, all the episodes and whatnot. You also worked with Mike Nichols on the Charlie Wilson's War. Tell me what it was like to work with the legend, Mike Nichols.
Intimidating, thrilling.
In what way was it intimidating?
This is the guy that directed The Graduate and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I mean, the body of work. I mean, I grew up as a kid listening to his records with Elaine May. And then all of a sudden to be in a room auditioning for Mike Nichols on the Paramount lot for a movie with Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts, pretty surreal. He was already in the pantheon of the greatest directors of all time in my book. At one point, I think he had 3 shows on Broadway running at the same time and a movie up for Best Picture. I mean, he was the fucking man for a long time. Yeah, it was intimidating walking in that room. And I was reading for the role of a congressman. I mean, I had a couple of little scenes with Tom and some other wonderful character actors playing congressmen. My icebreaker to Mike, when I walked in the room and sat down and got comfortable in the sofa, before we read with each other, and he read with me, which was lovely.
Wow.
Ellen Lewis was the casting director. She does all of Scorsese and extraordinary casting director. Testament to Mike's attention to detail, the fact that he would take the time to read even the smallest of roles with actors. And so a very, very dear friend of mine growing up and a very dear friend of my mom's, a man named Bob Willoughby, you can Google him, an extraordinary set photographer who shot The Graduate and Virginia Woolf and Ocean's 11, Rebel Without a Cause, pretty much Lion in Winter, every major film in the 60s and 70s. Bob was there on the set shooting it behind the scenes. And so he shot The Graduate and Virginia Woolf. And so I said, hey, we have a mutual friend, Bob Willoughby. And he lit up. And before we read the scene, and he lit up, and all of a sudden he started telling stories about Bob Willoughby, and he went back in time to The Graduate. And that put me at ease, and obviously just one of the great raconteurs and storytellers of all time. So we had a lovely kind of vibe and a lovely conversation in that moment before I read. And then I read the role, and he looked at me, he said, "I'll see you on set, kid." That was like in the room, which is rare when the director says, "Hey, you got the gig." And I'd reached out to Bob. He's written a book. You can find it still on Amazon. One of the great documentary photo books of that particular era of 60s filmmaking called The Platinum Years. And it's filled with his amazing photographs. And so I had Bob sign a book to Mike and send it to me. And so when I walked onto the set, I gave him this signed book from Bob Willoughby. And then I will never forget it. I just got a chill thinking about it. But during a lunch break, sitting in director's chairs around Video Village, Mike opening up the book and flipping through it and telling stories. I could show it to you right now, but your listeners wouldn't see it. But there's a great photo that Bob took of Anne Bancroft in the foreground with Dustin Hoffman back in the distance, in a kind of a limited perspective. It's a great, great shot. And so listening to Mike Nichols tell stories about The Graduate and Catch-22 that Bob also shot for Mike. That was one of the great moments in my life. And I had that same experience when I worked with Dustin Hoffman years later on a show called Luck for Michael Mann and David Milch. And I gave Dustin a copy of the same book. And Bob Willoughby used to babysit Dustin when he was a kid.
Wow.
So that was their connection.
How many of these books did you buy?
I have a lot. I've got a bunch of them. Bob sadly is no longer with us, but I have many of these books. But for these two iconic film personalities, for Mike Nichols and Dustin, I was lucky enough to have this Bob Willoughby connection that was sort of my entree into. And I remember bringing the book to Dustin in the makeup trailer on Luck when we were working one day. And Dustin did the same thing. He flipped open the page to a scene of him and Anne Bancroft rehearsing in bed on a soundstage. And he went down memory lane. And that's another glorious memory of mine.
You really do have to write a book.
I really do have to write a book. Yeah.
You really do. Mike Nichols, one of his later films that he directed is one of my all-time favorite films. My wife and I watch it a couple of times a year still. It's called Closer, and there's only like 4 people in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a good movie.
I saw the play of it. It started out as a play. Patrick Barber saw the play version of it out here at the Mark Taper Forum in L.A., and which also sadly no longer exists. And Maggie Gyllenhaal was the role that Natalie Portman played in the film.
Oh, wow.
A very young Maggie Gyllenhaal. And I remember coming out of the theater going, holy shit, who is that? Like, she was extraordinary. And of course, she's become one of our great actors and directors as well.
Again, we're going to bounce all over the place. In 1956.
I was not even alive then.
I'm aware. Milton Levine, better known as Uncle Milton, created a toy called the Ant Farm.
Yeah.
A little birdie told me that you met this guy once. Tell me about that.
Where did you get this?
What?
Where did you hear this? This is crazy.
I am amazing.
You are amazing.
I am. Tell me.
I met him on an airplane. I was sitting next to Uncle Milty's Ant Farm guy on an airplane, and I had one, and it was one of my favorite things to play with as a kid. And I remember sitting next to it. It was like meeting a rock star for me as a 7 or 8. I was on a plane with my mom.
It was like meeting Jeffrey the Giraffe from Toys R Us.
Exactly. I couldn't believe I was sitting next to the man who created Uncle Milton's Ant Farm. And he ended up sending me one. And like about a week later, there was a box filled with ants and a brand new ant farm. And he signed it. So it's somewhere, I don't have it anymore, but like he autographed it in whatever the late 60s, early 70s version of a Sharpie was. I had an ant farm signed on the glass outside of the ant farm to Spencer from your Uncle Milty. So
that is so cool.
I don't know where you dug up that nugget, but that's impressive.
Or maybe I am Uncle Milton. No, wait.
Maybe you're Uncle Milty.
You were a producer on a narrative fiction podcast called America 2.0.
Correct.
Tell me how you came to be involved with this project and why you did it.
Why I did it. Loved the script. When I read it, I was invited to have a table read of the script. It was a pilot. It was a 1-hour pilot. Political drama based in D.C., which is a world that I love and know very well. Having lived there, I've spent my last good chunk of the last 11 years of my life there. My partner is in D.C. So I'm fascinated by that world. And I went to the table read and fell in love with this writing and this writer. And I went up to the writer afterwards. His name is J.S. Mayank, Indian born, and then lived in London and went from Delhi to London to college at Wake Forest, and then somehow out to L.A. One of the most brilliant writers. If he listens to this, I can't sing his praises enough. One of the most brilliant writers. He can write in any genre, just an exceptional talent. And I went up to him and I said, hey, man, I don't know if this is going anywhere or what you have in mind to do with this project, but I'd love to be a part of it. And he looked at me, he said, no, you don't understand. I wrote this role for you. I wrote the role of Porter for you. And I said, oh, well, you're my new best friend. And we became pals. And I said, listen, anything I can do to help you get this thing off the ground, because I just love it. Love his facility with story and the way he tells. He's just great with language. Cut to, he's represented by an agency here called UTA, big time talent agency. And they said, listen, we can't do anything with this. Nobody will touch politics right now. In the age of Trump, everything's too toxic. West Wing had its moment, but nobody wants to see political dramas. So the script collected dust on the shelf at this agency for a while. And so JS said, hey, why don't we chop it up into 6 little bite-sized bits and turn it into a podcast? I'm ashamed to say I'd heard of a podcast. I didn't really know how big the podcast world was. It's obviously exponentially bigger now than when we made the podcast 5 years ago. But there was a wonderfully done podcast called Homecoming, which was turned into a series with Julia Roberts. But then it was with Catherine Keener and Oscar Isaac and David Schwimmer, beautifully produced. And that was sort of our template. And we took the hour pilot and he chopped it up into 6 segments. And I said, let me produce it. I'll cast it. I'll find you a cast. And so I reached out to Lawrence Fishburne and Steven Weber and Kate Walsh and Patrick Adams. I just called my friends. Shanola Hampton, who was on Shameless at the time. Fishburne, young up-and-coming actor.
You guys will hear about Lawrence Fishburne soon. He's going to be somebody.
He's going to be somebody. Patrick Adams, just coming off of Suits, Kate Walsh. So it was an all-star cast. And I said, hey, you guys want to come and do this podcast? And I'll pay you in Fritos and $100. And they were all, sure. And they did it. And it turned out to be the #1 podcast in the world. We produced it, beautifully produced, and it did extremely well. And so now we're looking at possibly a season 2, but now it was relaunched again last year, the season 1. Well, things are more toxic than they've ever been, but there's a little bit more room there's a lot of political dramas that are being hatched.
Yeah, take it to Netflix. They're doing The Diplomat.
I love The Diplomat. I love that show.
It's so good. I'm waiting to see you in it.
Yeah, my buddy Michael McKean's in it. And I was a longtime fan of Rufus Sewell.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Introducing Loom Stupid, where fashion meets quirkiness. Whether you're looking for statement tees that spark conversations or funky pieces that add whimsy to your outfit, Loom Stupid has got you covered. Join the fashion revolution and express your unique style with Loom Stupid. Visit our exclusive website at www.loomstupid.com and discover a world of fashion that's brilliantly bizarre and undeniably chic. New designs are being added all the time. loomstupid.com. Get your whimsy on with Loom Stupid, because being silly is the new stylish.
Let's get back into it.
You're friends with Michael McKean?
I'm friends with Michael McKean. We are part of a group that I started 5 years ago called the CADS, the Character Actors Dining Society. I'm surprised you didn't know this. You knew about the ant farm.
My research only goes so far.
I guess so. Well, the CADS is something that it's a little group of dudes that we started one night. We had a dinner, and it was me, Fishburne, Steven Weber, Eric McCormick, Alfred Molina, and Titus Welliver.
Oh, my God.
How many is that? 6, 5 of us, 6 of us. Oddly enough, it started out just me and Alfred Molina, who's an old pal. He and I did a play together 25 years ago. And his wife was in an assisted living place. She'd sadly had Alzheimer's and passed away. And I'd moved my mom into this place. She's doing fine and well, but there were several falls and there were some health issues. So I needed to move her in there. So he's one of the loveliest gentlemen on the planet. He reached out to me. We were always bumping into each other at this assisted living place. Every time I would see him, he'd say, how's your mom? How's your mom? And I'd say, let's go have a martini and talk about the women in our lives. And so we arranged to have a dinner at Musso and Frank's. And Alfred called me and said, do you know Steven Weber? And I said, yeah, of course I do. It turned into Steven Weber said, hey, can I bring Titus and Eric McCormick? And I said, sure. And then I said, let me bring Fishburne. This is so name droppy. It's disgusting. But anyway, who cares? These are all old friends. We all ended up having a dinner. And we said, let's do this again. And then a couple weeks later, there was a gathering at Kevin Pollak's house. And Richard Kind was there and said, hey, I know I live in New York, but can I join you at one of these dinners? And Pollak was like, I want in. So the group is now, it's those 6 guys from Musso's, including now we have Michael McKean, Kevin Pollak, LeVar Burton, Jason Alexander, Michael Nouri, Paul McCrane, Fishburne, and Bryan Cranston. There's 12 of us. We've kind of like locked the door at 12. And we are the CADS. And we meet once a month for dinner at an undisclosed location in LA and just have a good bottle of wine and a shit ton of laughs, tell old stories and lies and jokes. Between Kevin Pollak and Jason Alexander, 2 of the funniest men on the planet, it's a blast. And then we pepper in special guest stars. So last month, Christopher McDonald stopped in and sat and joined us. Ron Perlman. It's for character actors. I missed 2 guys. Noah Wiley and Rob Morrow are the other. That's our group. And we've all known each other. I didn't know McKean or Pollak. I knew the rest of the dudes, knew most of the rest of those guys or worked with them. Cranston, Jason Alexander directed me in a play 2 years ago. We've all known each other. We've all been in the trenches for 30, 35 years. So it's really just about camaraderie and brotherhood and friendship. And we're on a text chain that is unbroken for the last 5 years. That is, God forbid the FBI ever gets a hold of it, because it's filthy jokes. You know, do you know anybody know a good podiatrist? I mean, it's like it runs the gamut from horrible jokes that have the C word in them. Alfred Molina is one of the funniest joke tellers and storytellers ever. To, does anybody have a good proctologist? Yeah, I do. And then we'll go down a rabbit hole of proctology jokes.
I'm guessing that the podiatrist question came from Richard Kind.
That was for me, actually. That was for me. And everybody had a great podiatrist. I mean, everybody could recommend a great podiatrist.
Now, Kevin Pollak is one of the reasons that I started my own podcast. He had a podcast called the Kevin Pollak Chat Show, KCPS.
Sure, on YouTube. He did a couple hundred episodes, I think.
A couple of hundred. And LeVar Burton was his first guest.
That's right.
Kevin Pollak is also the reason that I am friends with Clint Howard.
It's
a weird, bizarre story, but I also, right before I started my show, I mean, like weeks before I started my show, I flew out to LA to meet up with Clint. And I had reached out to Kevin Pollak's people and said, I know that he films his chat show in front of no audience, but if I promise to be quiet, can I just be the only person in the audience? And they were like, yeah, as long as you don't bother anybody, sure, knock yourself out. And so I got to be the only person in the audience at the Kevin Pollak Chat Show.
Oh, fun.
It was a blast. That guy is so sweet.
So you probably met his wife or his partner, Jamie who's there, and Sam Levine.
Jamie Foxx.
Yeah, Jamie Foxx. They're a great couple.
Man.
Love them.
Kevin is, anyway, they're all super rad.
He's a gem. And they're just all very dear men to me. It's a good group. It's funny because like a lot of my women character actor friends say, hey, what's the deal? Is this like the He-Man Woman Haters Club? Is it all boys? So we're going to open it up to...
girls can't be CADS.
Girls can be CADS. As I've been told over and over by Allison Janney and Brooke Smith and Margot Martindale and a lot of the gals that want to join our crew. We just need to build a bigger table, I guess.
I'm talking to you, the Smokehouse. Build bigger tables.
Exactly. Exactly. That's so funny you mentioned that. I'll show you this since it's right here. Our second CADS dinner. I mean, sometimes people can make it. Sometimes, people are out of town working. So this is our second dinner at the Smokehouse. It's Alfred Molina, Lawrence Fishburne, Eric McCormick, and me.
I have one of those too.
From the Smokehouse?
Yeah, except it's me and Clint.
And that's Clint. I love that. Oh, that's great. The exact same frame, the paper frame.
I love it.
Lawrence said, hey, I'm bringing a special guest with us. And we were intrigued because whenever we say we're bringing a special guest to our dinners, we don't say who it is until they show up. So like last month, it was David Paymer. And before that, we had Chris McDonald and Ron Perlman. One time, Diane Keaton was walking by our table and we all just flipped out and she sat and joined us. Diane Keaton is actually the first unofficial female CAD, but I digress. So Fishburne said, I'm bringing a special guest. We meet at the Smokehouse and we sit at this booth and we said, Fishburne, where's the special guest? What's the intrigue? And he brings out of his satchel a black and white photo of Roscoe Lee Brown, wonderful actor, Roscoe Lee Brown, from the Cowboys and a million things. That was at his booth, his regular booth at the Smokehouse. So you can't see it, but this photo of Roscoe Lee Brown sat over our shoulders at this dinner. And Lawrence told stories about Roscoe Lee Brown. Roscoe was in the August Wilson play Two Trains Running with Lawrence that Lawrence won the Tony Award for and was Lawrence's mentor. So we talk a lot about mentorship and for me, obviously Sandy and Bryan Cranston is a kind of a touchstone for me as an actor, as far as like a journeyman character actor that had just been knocking around for 30 years and then won the lottery. To go from Malcolm in the Middle to Breaking Bad, it completely changed his career. So we just all feel like lucky to be able to get to do what we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Seriously, write
a
book. Write a book.
Yeah.
Write a book.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you back for a second time if you'll have me. Like you have such great stories. Oh my God.
Sure. I'm just getting started. I'm wondering, when is he going to ask me about, because inevitably there are Star Trek questions, there are Tarantino questions. So let's come back. We'll do a sequel.
Okay, cool. Side note, you have played different characters on a couple of different series of Star Trek. And Clint Howard is the first person that was ever allowed to do that because Gene Roddenberry had a rule that if you were in a Star Trek, you could never play anybody else.
Right.
And because of Clint, he's been in like 5 different series or whatever. Because of Clint, they had to change that rule. It was an accident that they let him slip through, but then they had to change it.
Right.
Okay. You were recently in Seoul, Korea. Is that right?
I was, yeah, last month.
Can you tell me what you were working on or?
Yeah, I can't really tell you too much about it. It was a Disney Plus miniseries called Tempest with 2 massive Korean stars. It was me and Brooke Smith, who I mentioned earlier, wonderful actress from Silence of the Lambs and Grey's Anatomy, and John Cho. There were a few American actors that they brought over to Seoul, and I played the president. That's as much as I can say because it was in the trades, but I played the president of the United States, and I was there for 3 weeks. I had an absolute blast. Loved it.
In a suit, you look like a politician. So well cast.
I get that a lot.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Last question for this time. Please tell me the story of how Beau Bridges gave your mom a bloody nose at her wedding, on her wedding day.
I wasn't around for that, but from what I understand, my mom was good friends with Beau and Jeff's dad, Lloyd. And so Lloyd and his wife had brought their kids to my parents' wedding, which was apparently quite star-studded. And I mean, looking at pictures of their wedding, it was Sandy Koufax was there, for God's sake. Robert Stack and Jane Mansfield. And I mean, it was crazy. I wish I'd been invited.
I have a hunch you might have been there based on some earlier conversations. You might have been there.
That's a tricky conversation, but yeah, I think I might have. Yeah, I think you're right. I was definitely I was there in some form as a zygote. I think my mom had bent down and Beau Bridges had a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He was holding a tray and he lifted the tray up and my mom slammed her nose on it. Something wonky happened, a total accident, and my mom got a bloody nose from that. I mean, he was a little kid. It was an accident. It was at their wedding reception. And my mom walking around with the, Kleenex on her nose. And years later, 40 years later, I'm on the set of the show Masters of Sex and working with Beau, who I had met, I think, for the first time. And all my life as a young actor, people would say, has anybody ever told you look like Beau Bridges? You look like a skinny Beau Bridges, which...
I was going to add that part. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully he never heard that. But yeah, I got that a lot. I got Beau Bridges. I got Timothy Hutton, Gig Young, which was random. But Beau Bridges, I got a lot because of my eyebrows. So I'm on Masters of Sex. And I told this story to Beau. I said, I'm sure you don't remember this, but I said, my mom is Kathy Nolan. And he said, oh, I was at your mom's wedding. And I said, I know. And do you remember like giving her a bloody nose? He said, I don't remember, but I feel terrible about it. Beau's got to be later 60s. So he must have been 6 or 7 maybe at the time. So he said, I feel badly. Is she around? And I said, yeah, let's call her. So I got on my cell phone and I got on the phone. My mom was on the phone. I said, hey, Mom, somebody wants to talk to you. And Beau Bridges got on the phone and said, hey, Kathy, it's Beau Bridges. And I could hear through the speaker, oh, my goodness, Beau, how are you, darling? He said, listen, I just got to tell you, I'm so sorry about giving you a bloody nose at your wedding in 1962. And she said, oh, sweetheart, all is forgiven. And they talked for a little while. And it was like one of the sweetest moments of my life. And he handed the phone back to me. And he's like, I got to see your mom at some point and give her a hug. So later on, we kind of arranged a little lunch where they could meet and hugged it out. But how sweet is that? He called her 50 years later to apologize for.
That is precious.
Yeah, it was precious. It was actually, that's the word for it. It was precious. It was a sweet moment.
That was really, really sweet. Spencer Garrett, tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
They can find me on the Twitters at #1 Spencer Garrett or X or whatever we call it now. But I'm mostly on Instagram at Spencer Garrett 1, #1.
Is there another Spencer Garrett that we need to be worried about? Do we need to take somebody out?
A lot of Spencer Garrett imposters. I'm blocking and reporting probably 5 a week. People that claim to be my manager, people that claim they're a Nigerian prince named Spencer Garrett that want money from, they're everywhere. And friends of mine will say, hey, there's another one. And we've got to report them. But there's only one Spencer Garrett at Spencer Garrett 1.
Love it.
But find me there and follow me. And if you have a nice, respectable question, you can shoot me a DM and I will answer your question. I get a lot of actors that ask me questions about where to study, who to study with, what book should I read, etc. So if I'm feeling chatty, I will write them back and send them a long list of movies they should watch and plays they should see and things like that.
Hey, maybe one day you'll get drunk and accidentally just start sending out those Willoughby books to all the people who ask what book you should read.
I think I've got 3 left. But you can find it on Amazon, I think. But just go on Google and you can do a deep dive. You can find his work on there. It's pretty exquisite.
It sounds fantastic. I'm definitely going to check that out. Wow. Spencer Garrett. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and your hectic knowing everybody and acting with everybody's schedule to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street, man. I really appreciate it.
That was a pleasure, brother. Let's do a part 2 anytime.
Absolutely, dude. I appreciate you so much. And I will talk to you later, man.
Thank you, bud.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Opening music is the song FSP Theme, written, performed, and provided by Ambush Vin.
Closing music is from the song Say My Name off the 2021 album Underdog Anthems, used with permission from Jack's Hollow. If you like the show, tell a friend. Subscribe and rate and review the show on iTunes and wherever else you download podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the episodes are available there as well. Check me out on Vero at Fascination Street Pod and TikTok at Fascination Street Pod. And again, thanks for listening.